E-bikes have improved massively over the last few years, and in particular they've become more and more desirable. Unfortunately, that's meant that they've also become more and more desirable to thieves too. So we're going to show you how to stop that thief stealing your bike. Hi folks, I'm Jason and welcome to ebike-centre. So you've got yourself a fancy new e-bike, you've worked hard for it. The last thing you want is someone stealing it from you. So we're going to show you in a few easy steps how you stop someone stealing that bike. So the most important thing to think of to start with is that that bike needs to stay where you left it. So it's all very well talking about immobilisers and tracking devices, but ultimately you don't want anyone to have the bike and you don't want to be chasing after them to get your bike back. You want it to be left where you left it. So to start with, we have to talk about locks. And there are many, many locks out there on the market, and you've got to decide which lock is right for you. But to start with, you need to talk about the security of the said lock. And in the UK, there is a rating agency called Sold Secure, and they test locks and they give it a rating from ungraded all the way up to diamond. The longer it takes them to break into it, and the more significant the tooling and that they need to break into that lock, the better the grade it gets. So there are lots of locks on the market of different shapes and sizes, but what is important is you find one that is the right grade for the value of the bike that you've got. So we would always recommend, and most insurance companies insist upon, for an e-bike, certainly an e-bike over £2,000, that you have a lock that is graded gold standard or above. So this might be different in different countries, and it might not be the case for your particular insurance company, but we would always say gold standard for an e-bike is a very good starting point. So gold standard may not be the rating agency that's used in your country. So do have a look on the labels on the back of all the packaging for the locks, and also obviously on their online information. There will be other rating agencies there as well. So just check which is applicable for your country, but you'll often see there might be gold standard Sold Secure on there, along with the ratings for your country as well. So first up on the style of lock, we have the trusty D-lock. So these have been around a long time. These are your most cost-efficient option for locking up your bike in terms of strength versus cost for pounds spent, dollars spent, whatever it might be. So this particular one here retails at around £70. This has an alarm in it, so you don't need to have an alarm in it, and we'll talk about alarms later in the video. But to start with, you're talking about a gold standard lock. That's where it says Sold Secure on the front, along with a cable lock as well. So be aware the cable on any of these locks is not gold standard. It is purely the D section. This cable is used for securing wheels and other paraphernalia as well, so it might be your P&A, stuff like that. But in general, it's the D that you need to think about. And the reason why the Ds come in quite cheaply is they're very simple in their design. But the downside to the D is where you store it. They are a bit of a pain. They do need to be on a crossbarred bike, and often on e-bikes, because of the size of the batteries, there may not be enough space inside the triangle of your crossbar to actually fit one of these, so you might have to angle it backwards or put it on a rack. So they are a bit more awkward. Also, with that shape, you've got to be able to remember that you've got to get this lock and the object that you're securing it to within that space. So there are downsides and drawbacks to the D-locks, but mainly they are strong and they are cheap. Next up, we've got the chain lock. In this case, we have a diamond standard chain lock. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward. Great big hefty duty chain with a great big heavy duty lock. And as you can see, it is heavy. So you've got to decide, is this something that's portable enough for you? Admittedly, this is a diamond standard version. The gold standard isn't quite as heavy, but they are heavy. But on the flip side, they are malleable. They are very easy to manipulate around the frame of the bike and the object you're locking to them too, I mean. And then look, that's a much, much bigger circumference for getting it around the bike and that object. They can fold up nice and neatly as well if you get them in a bag. They also are cheaper in general as well, along similar sort of price point to the D-lock. They're not quite as cheap, but they are similar. So yes, bang for your buck and ease of use in terms of locking. These are a very, very good option. Downside is they're heavy and you've got to figure out how you transport it when you're out and about. They're a very good option for when you're at home though, so we'll come on to that later as well. Next up, we've got folding locks. One like this. You might look at this and say, what on earth is that? So this is actually in its holster, but they're very small and neat, as you can see. You undo the holster, slide the lock out of the holster, and this is actually the lock, which would, if I can get it to work, there we go, folds out nicely like this. Key goes into this side here, which then detaches this piece. You then wrap it around the frame and the object and back it in on itself again. So it's pretty much I'd say it's almost a hybrid between the D-lock and the chain lock that I had as well. So it's not quite as malleable as a chain lock, but it is more malleable than the D-lock. They generally, I don't think there's a diamond standard version of these. Gold seems to be the top end that they do on this folding lock, but in terms of practicality for storing it, these are by far and away the easiest, because this particular system will go either Velcro onto the frame, or it will also use the cage bolts as well. So it's very, very simple and straightforward to transport it around. It can be left on the bike when you're finished with it as well. So yeah, if you're looking for the most transportable and practical option, this is it. It's not got the same sort of reach as the chains, but it is better than the D, but it is the most expensive of the three. Next up, we've got the frame lock. So this is a lock that will fit onto the rear wheel of a bike. They're very, very popular in the Netherlands and in Germany. You see lots of bikes built in that part of the world fitted with these as standard. They're a very convenient and easy to use lock because they're always on the bike, and you simply turn the key and then you get a bolt that drops round underneath the frame and immobilizes the rear wheel. But as we mentioned at the start, it doesn't stop anyone picking the bike up. There is a way around that. A lot of these will have an option to fit a chain or a cable into this end that you can then wrap around that immovable object. However, it's very rare to find these, if at all, in gold standard or above, because getting them off the frame isn't that hard. I'm not a thief, I couldn't do it, but they can be broken off the frame relatively easily. They're a really good option if you're literally have the bike in your sight and you're nipping off very quickly and back again, but you are still running the risk of someone stealing your bike. But overall, a really practical option if you have the bike, as I said, within your easy reach, and if the bike's not that valuable. But overall, they're not the most secure, but they are a very good extra deterrent. If your bike already has one of these, then that's fantastic. The bike is already immobilized. You then use another lock of gold standard or diamond standard to wrap around the frame and an immovable object. And frankly, the thief at that point is going to say, there's 2 locks on that bike. I'm going to move on and look for another one. Next up, we've got wearable locks. In this case, we've got one from Light Lock.
Light Lock?
No, not Light Lock, Light Lock. But don't forget to like and subscribe. We are very close to our 1,000 subscribers now, so please, please, please like, subscribe, and click that notification bell.
Woohoo!
Anyway, back to the Light Lock. So these are what you call wearable locks. So these actually go around your waist rather than going around the bike. This particular lock I have in front of me is actually a silver standard lock. It was at one point gold, but unfortunately got downgraded. But the main reason I'm showing you this is it's got a circumference that goes around your waist, and it's got attaching points to go around there as well. Pros and cons. Pros, obviously it's very easy to transport about. You just jump on your bike in the morning, throw it over, or put it around your waist. I say not throw it over, it's never going to go over your head. But yeah, you put it around your waist and off you go, and when you get to the location, you lock it up. Downside is, okay, it's not going to be that comfortable if we're being realistic. It would be nicer to have it on the frame of the bike than around your waist, but it's just very simple and easy to use, and that is the benefit mainly of the wearable locks. Finally, I'm going to bring up cable locks. To be honest with you, they're just not strong enough, so for an e-bike, don't even bother. Bolt croppers will get through those like in no time at all, so just forget about cable locks unless you're using it for parts and accessories for your bike. Then it's quite useful on wheels, but overall, don't bother. Next up, we're talking about how you use these locks. It's all very well having a strong lock, but it's no good if you don't utilize it correctly. So here at ebike-centre, most of the bikes that we have heard of that we've been dealing with or sold or serviced that have been stolen have been stolen, unfortunately, because of user error with the locks rather than the locks themselves being cut through. So for instance, we had a customer, they had 2 very nice Focuses. They left them locked up overnight, and they chained them up with gold standard locks, but to a chain link fence. The chain link fence, unfortunately, isn't gold standard, and somebody saw them overnight and just cut through them with a pair of cable snips, and the bikes are gone. Again, somebody with a gold or a diamond standard lock, I can't remember which one they had, but they locked it up to a wooden post overnight. Someone's come along, sawn through the wooden post, the bike is gone. So it's well worth thinking about that. Actually, another one I had, they didn't use a gold standard lock at all, but they had the bike within easy view of them. They were in a pub, the bike was maybe 50 meters away from them. They put a really cheap lock on there. Somebody had, obviously they must have had a scout that went through first, checked what lock was on it, and then immediately someone ran past with a pair of bolt croppers, cut it, and was on the bike and gone before the guy could get out of his seat. So bear that in mind as well. You might think, oh, it's in easy reach, I'll be okay. Thieves are they're pretty adept, they know what they're doing. And ultimately, this is worth bearing in mind, and I'll talk about this later in the video as well, but most thieves, unless you leave a bike overnight, are opportunists. So if you've got a good lock on the bike and it's locked securely to an object that can't be cut through, then chances are the thief is going to miss your bike and go for something much easier somewhere else. Right, so we've talked about the styles of lock. What we're going to now talk about is where you'd fit those to your bike. So to start with, what we really need to focus on is getting the lock around a permanent part of the frame of the bike. So we're talking about going around the top tube, or on the down tube, on the seat stay, or around the chain stays themselves as well. But be aware, some chain stays, as in this case here, do actually come apart. Okay, it's not easy to do, but somebody could undo these parts and prise the frame apart and pull the lock away. So if you've got that, this, for instance, becomes a non-usable part of the frame, but on the other side, it doesn't, so you could use that. The beauty of using the chain stays for locking bikes together is you can actually get the longest reach on the bike. So if you've got a post here, for instance, where my arm is, you can put the lock around the chain stay and around the post, and that's particularly easy to do with a D-lock because they've got a limited amount of space. Whereas, if you were to try to put a D-lock around a fatter part of the bike, particularly one with a battery in the frame like this, you won't have as much space to go around the object. Let's say that my arm here is the object, you wouldn't have as much space to go around that object when you use the battery part, for instance. But if you've got something like this, a chain lock, you can pretty much put it anywhere. So we're talking about putting it on any part of this triangle, pretty much any part of these triangles. And as I said, bear in mind that that does undo here. What you don't want to be doing is putting it through the front wheel on its own, putting it around here, for instance, because take the front wheel away and that lock's useless. So that's where we want to start. That bike almost fell over. That's where we want to start with. And as I said, chain locks, you can see quite clearly. If I was to put this around the frame here, you've got a huge amount of room to put an object in there as well. And then talking about objects, so the objects you're going to want to put the lock around has to be permanent. It has to be something that can't be broken through very easily. So as we mentioned, you don't want to be using something made of wood. So a wooden fence post is no good. You don't want to be using a chain link fence, again, no good. You want to be talking about things like lamp posts, but ideally you'll want to be locking these bikes up into proper bike shelters themselves. So often these can have a lock to get into the bike shelter. So that's another added level of security. But if you use a proper a proper bike area for securing the bike, you've got loads more options as well as to where to secure the lock to. So you would normally find that you have a bar somewhere that runs somewhere along here that makes it very easy to attach the bikes to. So you can use a smaller lock if you need to do so in that case. Other things to be aware of is where you store the bike for any lengthy period of time. As we mentioned earlier, most thieves are opportunists. If you're going to leave the bike for a long period of time, you need to up the security level of the lock, because the more time you give a thief, the more prepared they can be and the quicker they can get through a lock. So we would always say, if you're going to leave your bike for a long period of time, ideally leave it in a proper bike shed or bike lock area, or you need to be extra careful with the locks you use and maybe have to double up on locks and maybe use two different styles of locks. For instance, you could use a chain lock and a D-lock, which means that the thief needs to bring two different styles of tool with them as well. So the more you can do to annoy the thief and make it less desirable or less easy to steal your bike, the more likely they are to walk away from your bike and find another one. So moving on now, we're looking at a low step frame bike here. So you have less options of where to secure the bike to, but the same rules apply. You need to find a space that is permanent on the bike. So around here, getting a lock that comes around. So for instance, you've got your lock here. Okay, I haven't undone it, but imagine I have. You could quite frankly, or quite easily, put it around that point there, and you've got loads of space to put it around another object. Again, you can use the chain stay and the seat stay area here if you want to elongate the space between you and the object, or if you want to get two bikes together. But be aware, you wouldn't want to go just around this section of the frame, because if someone had the tools and the inclination, they could undo the stem, take the front wheel off, and they're away with your bike. So bearing that in mind, and then obviously don't just put the locks through the front wheel or the rear wheel, because then the bike will walk quite easily. As we mentioned, depends on the area you're in. Some people still do steel wheels, which is a pain, so you might need to lock up those wheels separately as well. But you don't need to use the same security level of lock. People aren't going to steal a wheel if it involves using an angle grinder or something to get through it, or even bolt croppers. But if the wheel is unattached and not locked, they might steal it to use with another bike, in conjunction with another bike they've stolen where they haven't got a front wheel. So bear that one in mind too. Alrighty, thanks. So we mentioned the folding locks earlier. What's quite useful now is to show you where you can use it in conjunction with your e-bike. So as we said, they've got a Velcro system here, which you can undo, which means you can fit it quite easily here to the seat post. You can put it to an angle if you want to. Bear in mind you might get a bit of strike from your pedal, but they should sit here like that, and then they come out nice and easy from the holster. Then it is a case of undoing it, like so. Out it comes. And then we go around the frame through a part that can't come undone. And then you've got to imagine it's got to go around an object, which in this case is going to be my arm, which will pretend it's a lamppost or a purpose-built cycle structure. And there we are, is your bike locked. And then undo it and you're away. Back off riding your bike. So there we are, folding locks, they fold. Next up, we're talking about immobilisers and alarms. As we said before, they are very good and they're a very good deterrent, but they don't stop someone stealing the bike in the first place. So if someone picks your bike up and takes it away and then realises that they can't actually ride it and use it, that will be annoying for them, but not as annoying for you because you've lost your bike. So it's a great additional deterrent, but overall be aware that a lock, there's still no substitute for a good lock. So some brands, for instance Specialized and all the new Bosch like smart system powered bikes, have got built-in immobilisers to the bikes as standard, which is very, very helpful. And there are other manufacturers out there that do it as well. However, there are other alternatives for those that don't have an immobiliser. So you can, for instance, add an alarm to your bike. So you can get a standalone alarm that can be fitted to the bike, or you can buy, as we said before, locks that have got alarms fitted into them as well. So the alarm is another really good additional deterrent. And then we're talking about tracking devices. So the Bosch smart system powered bikes can take an additional dongle now. It's about £90, which can be fitted into the motor, behind the motor housing, which is a tracking device as well. So the bike is immobilised, it's tracked, and if you've got a good lock on it as well, that bike is not really going to go anywhere. And if it does, you can track it. There is a fee to be paid for the tracking service. I believe certainly as of now, the first 12 months is covered with the purchase of that tracking device. Going forward, you will be paying a small monthly subscription. If you don't have a Bosch powered bike, then there are alternatives out there as well. For instance, we have got here from Bike Finder a tracking device that goes inside the handlebar. Again, it's very discreet, it's hard to see. You can even cover it with the grips of your handlebar as well, so you wouldn't see it at all. So you have then got this backup option as well. They work over mobile, cellular, as well as standard GPS tracking. So these are a really good option, particularly if you live out and about in the country. If you don't and you live in a city, there is a cheaper alternative as well. You can be looking at things like the Apple AirTags or the Tile, if you're an Android user. These you can stow away inside the bike somewhere. Either some people stick them under the saddle, some people put them inside the battery housing. Some people get them in the seat post, it depends on the size of the seat post. But there are ways of fitting that and manipulating it into the bike so that you've got a very cheap, low-cost tracking device. But it does require lots of mobile phones to be within the vicinity. So great for busy cities, not so good for the countryside. Going back to the Bike Finder again, they do a subscription package, including insurance as well with this, which makes it a very attractive option for your bike. One thing we haven't spoken about yet is where you're locking the bike at this point. I know we've talked briefly about the objects that you're locking it to, but what I really mean here is, are you locking this bike up at home, or are you locking this bike up when you're out and about? We've really covered the out and about part in this video so far. What we haven't talked about is what you do when you're at home. So a lot of people think, okay, the bike's at home, it's in the garage, it's in the shed, it's safe. Well, sheds to start with, definitely not safe. They are far from safe. They're very, very weak and very, very easy to break into. So if you keep your bike in the shed, you must secure it to the ground in some format as well. So we're talking about mainly ground anchors. So a ground anchor would go into the concrete and it would stay there forever. I say forever, they do come out, but they need a heck of a lot of tooling to get those things out. So ground anchor and then a solid lock to put it through. So for instance, at home, I've got a nice bike. Sorry, I'm not bragging. I've got a nice bike. No, I've got a good bike and I love it. I don't want anyone stealing it. So I have it on a ground anchor in the ground, and I have a diamond standard frame lock that goes around it. So, not frame lock, diamond standard chain lock that goes around it, it's not going anywhere. I've also put a small alarm in there as well. It's not the most amazing alarm in the world, but it's another deterrent. So I just implore you, as many things as you can put in there to put the thief off, the better. They've still got to get through the gate as well, which is locked. So there's loads of elements they've got to get through, but the more you do, the less chance there is of your bike being stolen. And in the garage, loads of people think, my bike's in the garage, it's safe. Garage doors are not that strong either. If they know your bike is in there, and unfortunately thieves are patrolling, they'll drive around looking for people who've got their garage doors open, they'll have a look and they'll go, wow, there's a couple of bikes in there worth £5,000. It's worth their while breaking into that garage. So again, if it's in the garage, ideally lock it up as well. Again, I'd say ground anchors if you've got them, or you can put the ground anchors into, those anchors can go into the wall, or if you've got anything else inside there that's just immovable. Let's say if you've got 5 e-bikes, even if you chain them all together, that's a massive deterrent for a thief, because they can't move 5 e-bikes. They can move 1 or 2 if they're chained together, but they can't move 5. So, well, they probably can, but that's going to be bloody hard work. They need a team of them. So, as I said, the more you can do, the better.
So my advice to you is get yourself into ebike-centre, buy 5 e-bikes, 5 great big locks, and you're laughing. Well, maybe we are.
One other word of advice, particularly with talking about locking these bikes up at home, is apps. Things like Strava, Komoot, anything that's going to track your movements. There are settings on all of these apps to hide the last sort of certain distance or radius around your house. Because you'll get thieves that will go on Komoot, will go on to Strava, they'll look at your nice bike that you've shown loads of shiny pictures of, and they'll follow you home. They'll know where your bike is because you're showing them. You show a map from where you leave to where you go back to, and you show a picture of the lovely bike you've got. So always on Strava or any of these social media apps, make sure that there's no information that can lead them back to where you're storing those bikes. In conclusion, there is no substitute for a decent lock and for locking it up to something secure as well. It's always beneficial to have as many devices on the bike as you can. Appreciate it's not always practical to running around with lots of locks with you, but the immobilisers, the bikes that are fitted with tracking devices are a really good deterrent as well. You can even get stickers to put on the bike saying that they've been stolen. Plus you can get the bike finder tabs from the police as well so that it's been registered. Lots of things you can add to the bike to make it undesirable for the thief, and bear in mind most thieves, as we said earlier, are opportunist thieves. If they see your bike is really well secured, they're probably just going to look at your bike, walk away and go for another one. So just bear that one in mind, and that's really it. So if you need any more information about locks, tracking devices, anything like that, please give us a shout, either on the phone or via email or on the chat here at YouTube, Instagram, wherever you might want to do it. Please get in touch, and if we don't see you in store, we will see you in the next video. Cheers.